Okay, dope. Back with another episode of Behind the Pads. I'm going to do a little breakdown of the track you just heard and watched, hopefully, and talk a bit about how I approached this track. So I'll start with the intro here, and it was pretty simple. I have my Maschine running out of the headphone into the SP404, and then from the 404 to my audio interface, the Complete Audio 6. And it's really a simple setup where I treat this as its own instrument, as if you're recording a guitar or a drum set, so that going into Ableton, it's just a stereo track, and I kind of commit to that performance without recording the MIDI and all that. And then I can use the external effects here. I didn't use them much in this track, but I use the filter on here, and I basically, you'll hear the actual sample, and then I'll show you where I chopped it, and we'll move on to the second part. So that was where I actually started chopping it. And I'll talk a bit about how I chopped it, and just to reiterate that all of these samples are still full samples. They're you should probably truncate the end to maybe lessen the load or like on your CPU or their space. But I'm lazy, and I just, when I'm inspired, I go through and chop, and sometimes it ends up being the full length of the sample. But I'm using choke groups, so what I was chopping is this. So that in itself, I just literally chopped it onto 5 different pads, or 6 pads here, sorry. So it's such a simple chop in itself, but it's got some cool percussive elements and stuff. But the thing it was missing for me was bass and any heavy bottom ends. So that's when I got into zoning. And zoning is basically you can go into the zone of a sample. I don't know the correct terminology on it, but it allows you to layer samples, basically one shots or long samples. It's cool because it allows you to layer one shot bass tone, or if you wanted to put like a vibraphone sample on top of your actual sample, or a choir. And in this case, I'm using a bass note on most of the pads, and what it allows me to do is kind of create a bass line as I'm playing it. So the example is without bass right here. And you can hear a little bit of bass from the sample itself, but with the bass and that little choir sample and bass on each one of these. Way harder. So you can see why I layer and zone samples. It just gives it a bit more of a fully produced sound. Now I'm going to talk about how I actually perform the main pattern in the song. A lot of people keep asking me about 16th notes and how I do those patterns. And I mentioned it in my last video, and I'll probably keep mentioning it in every video. Obviously, practice is the key. I come from a drummer background, and it's the dexterity in your hand. I feel like you'll build that through just repeating that motion over and over again. But the thumb is your actually main key in this, because you're constantly triggering that beat one with the hi-hat. So I'll show you the motion again, and I'll play the sample and then add the hi-hat in. So you can see what I mean with how I'm hitting that beat one with the hi-hat every time. And I come back to the pointer finger, and you just kind of chop around like that. I'll play the track itself again, and I'll try to slow it down, but because there's a sample, you know what? Let's mute the sample. And I'll just play the drum pattern out while triggering where the samples would be. So it goes like this. Now, with the sample unmuted, I can show you where I actually truncated one of the samples. Actually, 2 of the pads on here are truncated, where I chop the end really short, so I can kind of either end the track on it and transition into another song, or I can do that part where it's kind of this more staccato-esque vibe to it, where I don't want the sample to just carry on and sustain. So in this instance with the fill, I let the sample cut off when I want to end the track, where it's like, and I can just end there and be like, yo, thanks, what's up? Or in this case, on that second part of the track where I flip it and go. So it's in a choke group, so it chops the samples. That's the sample itself, but because it's okay, I'm getting carried away, but you get the point. It's like I feel like you have so much control when you figure out how to use your thumb in that whole finger drumming world. I feel like it really helps. And just to explain my setup quickly of how I arrange my drums, it's kick, snare, closed hat, open hat, and then in this track I ended up putting 2 toms in there. Typically, I let the sample speak for itself with, like, if there are percussive elements already existing in the track. It's kind of cool because you end up creating, like, polyrhythms that maybe didn't exist before. And it also saves me because I like to have as many pads as I can for the samples, but I need those 4 drums. So in this case, I wanted that ability to do the fill and kind of do that. And then shout out to my homie Sam B with the
Feel that sun.
voice tag. And lastly, if you dig what I'm doing, go check out my music on Spotify. I work with a bunch of homies, the Rare Sounds crew. They are super dope. Jacob Sigmund, who just dropped a track a couple weeks ago. Munch and myself dropped a track last Friday. We got Saint Amour and Zilly Holiday dropping a track on Friday. Super dope. We're all releasing music every single month. Keep up with it. And as usual, links to my gear that I use is in the description of the video. I appreciate your support. And please, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'm going to do my best to answer all of them, whether it's responding in the comments or actually in the next video. And your questions help me to help you to help me get better. Something like that. Peace.